here at FDA Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. I'm going to let my colleagues introduce themselves in a minute, but I want to welcome you here to an important meeting on inborn errors of metabolism. We have a very engaging discussion ahead, and I'll explain the format of that discussion a little bit later on before we get into it. But just a few housekeeping things and agenda items. So on the agenda, we're first going to have our FDA colleagues set the context for why we're here, why this meeting is important, a little bit of background. I'll come back up and give an overview of the discussion format before we get into it. This meeting is very different from meetings that FDA or others in regulatory agencies might conduct on this. Then we're going to have two discussion topics today. The first discussion topic will be on the disease symptoms and daily impacts that matter most to patients, followed by a discussion after a break on patients' perspective on current treatment approaches to treating inborn errors of metabolism, and this includes things such as participating in clinical trials and your experiences with treatments. There is an open public comment session today, and this gives people a chance, not just the patient and patient representatives in the room, but anyone a chance to contribute a few comments on this topic of IEM or other things you think are important. We'll ask you to sign up at the registration table if you haven't done so. Depending on the number of people who sign up, we'll set the time for that. It will be no more than 3 minutes, and we'll ask you to keep your comments short. We want really to engage in the discussion on the two discussion topics. And then we'll have some closing remarks by my colleague, Teresa Mullen, at the end of this meeting. There are restrooms located around the corner behind that kiosk, and keep going down the hall. There is a kiosk here for light refreshments. Please feel free to get up as you need, whenever you need. And if you need anything during the meeting, my colleagues are around. This meeting is being recorded. It's on the webcast. And I want to give a special welcome to those of you who are attending on the webcast. You will also have every opportunity to participate today through the facilitated discussion, through by submitting your comments as we ask questions up here. Just go ahead and respond to those through the webcast. And the meeting, as it's being recorded, a transcript of this meeting will be posted on our website some days following the meeting. So with that, I'm going to ask my colleague Donna Griebel to come up and give some opening remarks. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the patient-focused drug development meeting on neurologic manifestations of inborn errors of metabolism. I'm Donna Griebel. I'm the division director for the Division of Gastroenterology and Inborn Errors Products in the Office of New Drugs at FDA. Our division reviews drugs intended to treat inborn errors of metabolism, or I'll refer to that as IEM for short. We're happy to see so many patients in the room today and patient advocates in the room, and we understand that you represent a wide range of IEM disorders. And I understand that there are many more patients and advocates on joining us via the web, so welcome everyone. Today's meeting is one in a series of what we're calling FDA's patient-focused development meetings. Dr. Teresa Mullen will be providing more details on this initiative in a few minutes. The inborn errors of metabolism include a range of genetic disorders in which the body has a metabolic deficiency that results in a buildup of harmful substances in the body. Dr. Teresa Mullen, who's a medical officer in our division and who is also a specialist in neurology, will provide a bit of background on IEM in a few minutes as well. This is a very important meeting to us. We fully understand that inborn errors of metabolism are serious conditions and that there is an unmet medical need for patients who have these disorders. It's FDA's responsibility to ensure that the benefits of drugs outweigh the risk, and therefore having this kind of dialogue with you is extremely valuable to us. What we hear from you today can help us understand how patients view benefits and risks for treatments for IEM. We also know that we need better endpoints to measure how well these drugs are working, and that's why we want to hear from you today about the different ways that neurologic symptoms of IEM affect your daily life and or your child's daily life. It's also important to hear what you value in a treatment and what you would like to see in future treatments for you or for your child. Finally, we would like to hear about the considerations that you think are important regarding clinical trial participation as well as the informed consent process. It's important to remember that FDA is just one part of the drug development process. We don't have primary responsibility for developing drugs or for running clinical trials. Drug companies working with investigators, researchers, and the patient community are the ones who conduct the trials and who submit the application for drugs to FDA. However, at FDA, we work closely with drug companies throughout the drug development process. In our division, we are particularly anxious to work early and often with companies who are developing drugs for rare diseases. And through these meetings, we work together to try to ensure that trials design will be successful in defining the efficacy and the safety of the drugs in development. Our division firmly believes that the best access for patients to an effective drug is through the availability of an approved drug. I know there are a lot of representatives from industry, academia, and others in the room or joining us via the web. Thank you all as well for being here and being part of this discussion. We believe this meeting will provide valuable input for you as well. So again, welcome to everybody. I'll turn the meeting over now to Teresa Mullen, who will talk about the broader efforts.
Thanks, Donna. Good morning. And so, as she said, I'm Theresa Mullen. I direct the Office of Strategic Programs in the Center for Drugs. And our office has the privilege of leading this and organizing this initiative and working and supporting our medical officers and our divisions to prepare for these meetings. So just to tell you a little bit about this, we initiated this patient-focused drug development effort as a part of a commitment that we made under the reauthorization of the Prescription Drug User Fee Act. And this is the 5th time around for this, so this is a PDUFA 5 is what we call it. And this initiative is intended to provide us with a more systematic way to collect information from patients, getting their perspective on serious conditions, conditions for which there may not be very many available, if any available, approved therapies. And we realized we needed a way to do this outside of the context of a particular drug, because it allowed us to just get patient input without worrying about screening for conflicts of interest or anything. We'd have a much more free-flowing and rich communication, we thought, from patients. We'd hear a lot more if we could just do this independent of any particular drug, and it would inform the development of a wide range of drugs, perhaps, for that disease. And we knew that the patients would provide us with this unique perspective that no one else can, because patients are the ones that are going to get any benefit from a drug, and they'll be experiencing whatever risks are associated with that drug. And so this patient perspective, this unique perspective, gives us a better understanding of the context of the disease and the context in which we'll evaluate the benefits versus the risks of a new drug therapy. We thought this kind of input would help us throughout the development process, even during early stages of development, to weigh benefits and risks as they emerge and as the picture of evidence emerges for a new drug, as well as helping us at the time of application review. And so this patient-focused drug development initiative is one in which we commit to do at least 20 different disease areas, and we see this as piloting an approach that we think we really would like to have all disease areas. We'd like to have this kind of patient input to inform every possible disease area. Within our limited resources, we're doing 20 and then some over the next over this 5-year period, and we're learning a lot about what's effective and what works well. Some patient groups are even approaching us to see if we can't sponsor the meeting. Would they sponsor the meeting and we'd come? And we're trying to work that out because we think this is a really important source of input for us. And so, which 20 diseases were we going to cover in this 5-year period? So we had a public, we put out a Federal Register notice with about 40 disease areas that we identified, the review divisions identified as ones where they felt they really benefit from having some more input. They didn't have a lot of information that as much as they would like. We got a lot of public comments. For the first 3 years of the 5-year period, we've picked 16 diseases. This topic of neurological manifestations of inborn errors of metabolism was a kind of a cluster, and one that was on our list and is on this first 3 years list. And here you see the diseases that we're focusing on in that first 3 years, 2013 to 15. And so last year we had meetings on chronic fatigue syndrome, HIV, lung cancer, and narcolepsy. And so far this year we've had a meeting on sickle cell disease, a meeting on fibromyalgia. Last month we had one on pulmonary arterial hypertension, and this meeting now on inborn errors of metabolism. And on the right side of this slide you see the ones we have for the remainder of this year and then next year. And soon we'll be coming out with our process to try to identify ones that we'll try to cover in these kinds of formal meetings in 2016 and 17. And as you note, it's a really wide range of disease areas that we had on that slide. Just go back for a second, I mean, very wide ranging, but have in common that we really would benefit from hearing more about what it's like to live with these diseases. What do patients do today to treat their disease? What kinds of therapy do they try to work with? And so we need that across that wide range. And so we have common themes and questions that we focus on in these meetings, even though the diseases that we're looking at across the whole set are quite diverse. And so with each one, we start out with a fairly basic set of questions, and we use a very similar set of questions each time. We have some tailoring of those questions depending on other questions that the review division may have that they would like to probe and hear from patients about. This gives them a unique opportunity to get that kind of input, so we have those kinds of questions as well. But we start with a set of questions about what it's like to live with the disease, what are the most bothersome, most important impacts on the patient's life, from a caregiver's perspective, also from directly from a patient's experience and their perspective, if they're able to talk to tell us about that. And then also, what are they doing to treat their disease are the two major themes. And these are important aspects of our benefit risk assessment. Those two questions of the degree to which this is an unmet need and the severity of this condition are two of the two components that set the stage for our clinicians to try to make an assessment of the context and the benefit risk and weigh the evidence of benefit and the safety information in that context. So we further tailor the questions. For an example, we had this meeting on HIV, and there was a question that the review division had about cure research. How would patients who are doing fairly well on the treatments that are available today feel about maybe going off treatment and trying a sort of a therapy that would be considered a cure? Would they be willing to do that? There are potential benefits, but also risks, and so it's very helpful to hear their perspective on that question. And so we've learned that patient involvement and participation is not only important, it's what makes these meetings successful or not. So we really are looking forward to hearing your perspective today. We know that it will give us very valuable insight that we don't have right now, that later today we'll be much better informed than we are right now. And so each of these meetings produces a voice of the patient report, and we collect the information from the patient testimony that we hear in the room. We get perspectives from the docket that people submit electronically, just statements to the docket. We also will get information from people on the webcast, and those are our three major sources. We pull this together and produce a report that tries to faithfully capture what we are hearing in the patient's words, describing how it is to live with their condition and what they think about the current therapies available to them. That report not only helps to communicate to our review staff, both those who are here, those who can't make it here, and we'll be able to use that as a resource. Industry sponsors who are thinking about developing drugs in this area will also find that useful. And we think there's a long-run impact here too. Some of these meetings have triggered discussions about how can we try to develop measures to better capture the things, these benefits or impacts that patients are telling us about, so that if we have a new therapy that might actually affect some of those things, we're able to capture that information and capture that evidence more systematically and rigorously in a clinical trial, and we may not be able to do that now. So there's what we call patient-reported outcome tools that are sometimes the discussion that follows these meetings as well, and how can we try to develop those. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Teresa Mullen to provide you with some background.
Hi, I'm Teresa Mullen. I'm a medical reviewer with the Division of Gastroenterology and Inborn Errors Products. And I'm going to provide a brief overview of inborn errors of metabolism, or I'll just say IEM for short, and talk a little bit about neurologic symptoms that we are commonly seen in these diseases. So the inborn errors of metabolism, or IEM, are a group of rare genetic disorders that basically cause a block in the metabolic pathway that leaves the body unable to properly break down a substance or synthesize certain substances in the body, like amino acids or carbohydrates. These genetic defects typically cause deficiencies of specific enzymes that will convert one substance to another. An example would be the sugar galactose to be converted to glucose. These metabolic dysfunctions can lead to progressive and permanent damage. Typically, if it's upstream of the enzyme, it'll cause a buildup of a substance that can reach toxic levels in the body. On downstream of the enzyme, it may deprive the body of essential substances that are needed to support specific functions in the body. And sometimes it alters other metabolic pathways that we haven't yet identified. There are over 200 known inborn errors of metabolism. Individually, these diseases are quite rare, but collectively, they account for a significant disease burden in our population. The IEM disorders vary widely in their symptoms, in severity, and disease progression. So two patients with the same disease may have a different course of the disease. Many of these diseases are fatal in infancy or childhood or even early adulthood. However, on the other end of the spectrum, some may progress quite slowly and some patients may live to adulthood, or the symptoms may not even show up until adulthood and the diagnosis may not be made until that time. So that can be the case in Wilson's disease. So we do see a lot of variety in these diseases. The diagnosis can be difficult because symptoms can be vague and nonspecific initially. And in some cases, in the childhood diseases, children can develop normally for a while and then later decline. So there can be a delay in onset of symptoms that are not recognized initially. We hope that new screening technologies will increase the identification of IEM disorders before the symptoms arise. And the hope is that earlier identification will allow for earlier therapeutic interventions to improve morbidity and mortality. So the symptoms or manifestations of IEM vary greatly depending on the underlying disorder. IEM can affect any of the major organ systems in the body, although some of the ones that we see more commonly are changes in physical appearance, involvement of the respiratory or cardiovascular system, involvement of the musculoskeletal system with either joint contractures or muscular weakness, liver enlargement or dysfunction. And very commonly, we see neurological involvement, which may include cognitive symptoms, psychological, or behavioral symptoms. The neurological symptoms are particularly common across the range of IEM disorders and are a significant burden for both patients and their caregivers. These symptoms are important to patients, and the FDA recognizes that they have a significant impact on your daily lives, and we felt that it was important to explore these symptoms further so that they can be better accounted for in drug development programs for these diseases. So just to go into depth a little further on what are some neurologic signs and symptoms. When we talk about neurologic symptoms, we often tend to think only of the brain, but I want to remind everyone that the nervous system not only includes the brain, but also includes the spinal cord and the peripheral nerves that go out throughout the body to innervate the different organs in the body. Some of the more common symptoms that we might see in IEM diseases are seizures, vision and hearing loss. Cognitive problems are quite common, and this can range in the spectrum from poor attention and concentration to more severe cognitive decline leading to a frank dementia. There can be language delay. We're hearing from many of you that you are seeing behavior problems in your loved ones that can be similar to those seen in Asperger's or autism disorders. Things like hyperactivity, impulsivity, compulsive or repetitive behaviors, or sensory processing issues. And we are interested in hearing more about those today. And sleep problems can be problems such as apnea or insomnia. Weakness is pretty common as well. And along with that, there may be problems with swallowing or breathing. Spasticity or stiffness in the muscles can be painful. On the other spectrum of that, we can see low muscle tone and hypotonicity. Abnormal movements can occur, things like myoclonic jerks, tremors or dystonia. Coordination and clumsiness, both in fine motor movements and also in walking with ataxia. And involvement of the peripheral nerves can lead to numbness and tingling and pain. Pain can be neuropathic pain from the nerves, or it can be more diffusely localized in the body depending on the area involved. Bowel or bladder problems can cause a significant problem for caregivers, I know. And again, walking problems or balance problems. Either patients never start walking in the first place, or they do reach the point of developing those motor milestones only to decline later. This list is not exhaustive. As I mentioned, the nerves innervate organs throughout the body, so sometimes neurologic symptoms can be vague or difficult to localize. We want to hear about the neurologic symptoms that are important to you and affect your daily lives, and feel free to tell us about any of them, no matter how small. And even if you're unsure if what you're experiencing even is a neurologic problem, we still want to hear. As far as treatment options, the goal for treatment of IEM disorders is to reduce symptoms, improve quality of life, and ideally slow or halt disease progression. Current therapies are limited. They may include dietary restrictions or dietary supplementation or medical foods. Enzyme replacements are available for a select number of the diseases, such as elaprase or naglazyme. Bone marrow transplantation may be an option early in the disease for some of the inborn errors of metabolism, or organ transplantation later. Most commonly, though, what we see are supportive therapies, things that treat the symptoms of the IEM disorders but don't necessarily alter the underlying course of the disease, medicines to treat seizures, the use of feeding tubes, ventilators. And we are also hearing from you that many of you make use of behavioral, physical, or occupational therapies, so we would be interested in hearing a little bit more about those as well today. There are many challenges in developing drugs for IEM disorders, and of course the most obvious one is that these are rare diseases, so there are a very small number of patients with the disease. PKU is one of the more common ones, but we are seeing applications come in for diseases where there are less than 100 patients identified worldwide. And within these rare diseases, then there's patients with a great deal of heterogeneity or diverse presentations of the disease. As I mentioned before, 2 patients with the same disease may have very different symptoms. These diseases may occur in both children and adults, which presents another special drug development challenge because children, are vulnerable patients who are not able to consent for themselves. So we have to take special considerations in mind to protect children in pediatric clinical trials that we don't have to consider as thoroughly in adult patients who are able to consent for themselves. And then most of these diseases, again, because they're rare, have very poorly described natural histories or descriptions of their clinical progression over time. That makes it difficult for us to identify what endpoints we should be monitoring in clinical trials. What signs and symptoms should we be measuring, and how do we measure them? And if it's a slowly progressive disease, do the disease symptoms progress in a time course that's amenable to a clinical trial, which tend to be relatively short? Is the measurement tool that's used applicable to both children and adults? And if biologic disease markers or biomarkers exist, are they even relevant to the disease? These are all considerations that we have to take in mind as we review, as the industry, pharmaceutical industry is developing the clinical trials and as we're reviewing them. Now, in order to help identify better endpoints for clinical trials, the FDA is very interested in patient-reported outcomes. Patient-reported outcomes, or PROs, can represent direct measures of treatment benefit identifying how a patient feels or functions. An example of this might be a pain scale or a scale that measures symptoms of ADHD. For conditions like the IEM disorders that are not well understood, input from patients is especially important. Patient and caregiver input is essential to capture important and clinically relevant disease symptoms in these PROs. And I should also mention that although these are called patient-reported outcomes, in some cases, patients cannot report for themselves if they are too young or too cognitively impaired to give us those descriptions. So in those cases, caregiver-reported outcomes may be appropriate. I should also say that although we do want this information and we do want these symptoms and we want to see PROs developed, all of these PROs that are developed do still need to be validated and evaluated in adequate and well-controlled randomized trials in order to be used in more pivotal clinical trials for drug development. So today we are here to listen to you. There are representatives here from the pharmaceutical industry, people from the FDA. Please use this opportunity to share with us the neurologic symptoms that are important to you and that impact your daily lives. And we are anxious to start incorporating these into the drug development process. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Donna and both Teresas. I'm going to give a little bit of background on our discussion format, but both of you have set it up very nicely, so hopefully I don't have to spend too much time speaking. We can get right into the discussion. Before we do that, I neglected to have my FDA colleagues introduce themselves. These are the experts, the real experts in the drug development and review of IEM products. So I would like you to go around and just say who you are and what office you're from.
Ron Farkas from the Division of Neurology Products.
Rachel Witten, I'm from the Office of Cellular Tissue and Gene Therapy.
Julie Bites, Director, Office of Drug Evaluation 3.
I already introduced myself. I'm Donna Griebel from O&D.
Theresa Mullen, direct the Office of Strategic Programs in the Center for Drugs.
Teresa Baracchio, Division of Gastroenterology and Inborn Errors Products.
Jim Bonna, the Office of Orphan Products Development.
Larry Bauer, Office of New Drugs, Rare Diseases Program.
Thank you very much. And they will be up here to help further the discussion, ask some more follow-up questions if you as participants say something that really piques their interest or they want to follow up on that, they are free to do so. As we've mentioned, the two topics are the neurological manifestations of IEM. That means the effects, the neurologically related effects of IEM that matter most to your child or if you're the patient's life. Here we're looking for concrete things. What particular symptoms have the most significant impact on that daily life? How do they affect the ability to do specific activities, and how do they change over time? And then we'll move into the current approaches to treating IEM. What are you doing to treat or manage your or your child's IEM? And how well are these addressing those neurological effects? And how do you know that? How do you see? What differences do you see? What are their biggest downsides? And what would you look for an ideal treatment to better serve those needs related to the cognitive, neurological effects? And then we'll move into a discussion on clinical trial participation and informed consent. For each of those two topics, we're first going to hear from a panel of patient representatives. Typically, we do have one adult patient who will serve on the panel, but primarily your parents who are speaking on behalf of your child or children. These participants reflect a range of experiences with IEM, a range of disorders, and a range of symptoms that you wrote in about or treatments that you have experience with or thoughts you have on clinical trials. And I just want to say thank you to everyone who submitted comments in as part of the selection process for the panel participation. Those comments really are helpful to us as we plan for these meetings and understand what you might want to talk about and what's important, what effects are important to talk about. After we hear the panel discussions, which really will set up a good foundation for a facilitated discussion that follows. And this we will broaden to include all of you, patients, caretakers, advocates in the audience, to build on the experiences we heard in by the panelists. So we're going to ask questions talk show style, and we invite you to raise your hand to respond. We'll ask you at least say your first name and the IEM disorder that you're talking about. That really sets a context, so we know we can put, we can have the disorder in the back. With that said, we're not going to be focusing on specific disorders. We're not going to run through a list or anything like that. We're focusing on neurological symptoms that you experience that we can kind of draw generalizable learnings from across all the different disease areas. I'm going to ask the panelists now, for those that are talking in topic 1, to come on forward and make your way up to the front table. You also, here in the room and on the web, have a chance to answer polling questions, and I'm going to ask the little clickers to be handed out to everyone. So if you're a patient representative, please raise your hand. The purpose of these questions is to really aid our discussion. They're in no way a scientific survey. They're completely voluntary. You don't have to answer the question. What they do is give us a sense of who's represented, what the representation is in the room and on the web, and an indication of what perspectives you might share in common and where there might be differences. Web participants, you'll see the questions in the webcast. We're asking that patients and patient representatives only please answer. And at a certain point, we're just going to ask either the patient themselves or one caretaker answer the question on behalf of that patient. You have to. These clickers are they're not too technologically challenging, we hope, but you do have to push the button very deliberately, very hard in order for it to show up. Web participants, as we mentioned, you can add comments through the webcast. Although they won't all be read or summarized today, your comments are incorporated into our summary report, and we do read them all. We'll occasionally go to the phones to give you another opportunity to contribute, and there will be information on the webcast at the appropriate time. You can also send us your comments through the public docket. This is a website that federal agencies have that we can receive comments from the public on topics that are important to us, topics that we open a docket for. We have one open for neurological manifestations of IEM. It's open until August 11, 2014. And we really encourage you, if you're here in person or on the web, to expand upon what you said here, or to share your fuller story through the docket. And if you know people who weren't able to make it today, encourage them to share as well. The more information we get, the more valuable it all is. Anyone's welcome to comment. It can be healthcare providers, researchers, industry, anyone. A few ground rules to make sure this discussion is as effective as possible. We really do encourage patients, caregivers, and advocates to contribute to the dialogue. Industry, researchers, and others, we very much appreciate you being here. We ask that you be in listening mode throughout the discussion. If you'd like to contribute, there is the open public comment. My FDA colleagues are here to listen. They might not be able to answer all of the questions that you may have. If you do have questions for us and they can't be answered today, please either send us, there's a patient-focused email that you've been getting correspondence on, send us an email with that, or submit a larger comment, a comment you just want us, a question you want us to think about through the docket. We will consider it then. The discussion will focus on those symptoms and treatments. And as Teresa Bracchio said, it's very hard to sometimes tell if it's a neurological symptom. We don't want you to worry about that. If it's important to you and you think it might be neurologically related, please share it. Same with treatments. We don't want to focus on particular treatments. This isn't here to really evaluate your experience with any specific treatments. What we're doing, again, is looking to see what can we learn broadly about these treatments and their development that we can continue to help improve that. If you have other comments on other topics, please feel free to use the open public comment period. Sign up for it outside on the registration table at the break. Sign up by the break so that we know we have that set. Of course, the views here expressed today are personal opinions, and we truly know that there is a range of your experiences, a range of severity, a range of the difficulties and the challenges you face. But everyone here today who's a patient or patient representative or an advocate is fully aware of these challenges in your own life. You experience them and you know others who do. So please feel free to share your experiences in a comfortable setting. We're all here to listen. With that, respect for one another is paramount. That goes without saying. And please let us know how we're doing, how the meeting went today. We hope it went well. The evaluations will be at the registration desk. So with that, we will start with a few polling questions just to get our fingers warmed up and to test these things out. If you're on the web, there are polling questions as well. First one is, where do you live? And everyone with a clicker can feel free to answer this question. Within the Washington, D.C. area, including the suburbs, or outside of the Washington, D.C. area? Okay, as we expected, most of you live from outside of the area. We thank all of you who have traveled here today to be with us and to share your comments, whether you just had to come around the Beltway or whether you had to travel more extensively. Have you or your loved one ever been diagnosed as having an inborn error of metabolism? Yes, so it looks like if I have to do some math calculations in real time, more than 25 of you here are representing a patient, or you're here for yourself, representing them. That is great to hear. We very much value your experience. I'm going to ask that the rest of the questions just be answered by either the person who lives with the IEM themselves or one caretaker, just so that we don't over-represent any particular individuals. What is your or your loved one's age? We understand that many of you have multiple children, so hopefully they fit in the range, or think of one child. 0 to 2, 3 to 9, 10 to 17, you'll press C, 18 to 35, 34 to 49, 50 or greater, or your loved one has passed. We do have a wide range, and that's very helpful for us. Well, actually, we have no one here in the infantile range. On the web, can we have those numbers as well?
So a lot of them, 33% 3 to 9, 25% 10 to 17, and 23% 18 to 34.
Okay. All right. So those of you with children or anyone, you can of course think back to that infantile stage, the young adults, but the young infants. But we do have a very nice spread otherwise. Yes. Okay, so did anyone else have a 0 to 2 and they pushed that A button and it didn't work? Okay. Keep us informed of this too. We do get sometimes where these clickers aren't the most reliable. Again, they're not used for any scientific purposes, so don't worry about that. But thank you, Amber. We'll call on you. Okay, is you or your loved one male or female? Okay, so we have a roughly equal split. Is it the same on the web? Similar on the web?
Similar on the web.
All right. With that, let's get into the discussion topic 1. We have 5 people who will give comments. I've put their names up here along with the disorder that they have. I will mention I'm not a medical expert. That's why we look for our colleagues to help with these questions, and that includes being able to pronounce most of these disease areas, so we will be sticking to the acronyms. So we have a range of the disease areas represented. We have one person who had a family emergency over the weekend and was unable to attend, so we will dial her in by phone at the right time. And one person, a very dedicated father, took the 6 a.m. flight this morning out of Chicago. He will be joining us when he arrives. I've asked them each to prepare about 3 to 4 minutes of comments that they're going to go through, and we will start with Whitney. Just push the little button and the microphone will come on. And keep it very close to your mouth. We have a hard time hearing.
Okay, is this all right? Okay. Yeah, so I'm the mother of a 4-year-old child with CTD. My son Reed has developmental and language delays, retardation, and epilepsy. The disease directly impacts Reed's brain function, but it's not a progressive disease. So it's likely that Reed will live into adulthood, and it's certain he's going to have a lifetime of constant care. While each day we deal with the obvious hurdles like Reed's inability to speak or perform the simplest of tasks, it's really the secondary sensory, behavioral, and cognitive symptoms that seem to most impact Reed's daily stresses and struggles. Reed's sensory issues play an important role in his life. Strong oral aversions and intolerance of many foods limit his diet. It's a constant battle to encourage eating and a financial strain to keep stocked with his rotation of preferred foods. As a result, Reed struggles with growth and weight gain, is frequently ill, and is extremely irritable. As he's grown, Reed's clothing and textural intolerances have required us to shift our focus. The 4-year-old Reed is now physically able to disrobe, and he does. His preference for nudity makes it very difficult to keep clothes, diapers, and shoes on him, and we've really had to integrate some adaptive devices in attempts to keep him clothed in public. This battle is ongoing. Aggressive behaviors are also part of Reed's life. Hair pulling, biting, self-injurious behaviors, and throwing objects happen all the time at our house. Curtain rods are pulled out of walls, furniture is turned on end, and home decor becomes broken or obsolete. As Reed has matured, we've seen an increase in this aggressive and destructive tendencies. Unable to manipulate toys appropriately means those toys go airborne and injuries happen. Pulling glassware off counters, spilling drinks, breaking household objects, slamming doors, and pulling things out of the refrigerator are his common go-to tactics for that immediate attention. Sibling rivalries have emerged, and without any speech, Reed's natural defense is to scream, bite, or pull hair. When he's upset, Reed's now biting himself. This leads to bruising and broken skin, but he just continues to use it as an outlet for his frustrations. As the parent of a special needs child, I fear for my son's safety. Severe cognitive impairments leave Reed without any recognition of safe and unsafe, and he won't hesitate to run into a busy street, walk out the front door, jump on my dining table, or walk right into a swimming pool. As his fine and gross motor development improves, we're really forced to address these safety issues head on. While he's now equipped with the ability to climb, open doors, and run, he's still cognitively unaware of the dangers involved. Reed does not respond to commands such as no, stop, or come, so we're always on guard. We're discovering locks on doors just aren't enough. Despite suffering from endless effects of his condition, it's these sensory, behavioral, and cognitive issues that hold the most power. Leaving the house, whether to go to school, a restaurant, or the grocery store, requires forethought and intense preparation. To do these things means that Reed must tolerate clothing, follow basic commands, and then behave in appropriate manners. Screaming and breath-holding tantrums, refusal to wear clothing, and being downright uncooperative are the usual deterrents from even attempting these social activities. These symptoms impact Reed directly, but they do take a toll on the entire family. As a mother and a caretaker, I find myself forced to choose. How do you cheer on one son from the bleachers while the other is running naked toward the parking lot? While I have a strong need to support one child, I'm forced to adapt our lives to best integrate the other. I have many wishes for my son. It's so easy to wish, but that just won't change Reed. There is no approved cure or treatment right now. The reality of Reed's disease touches every facet of his life and ours. And sure, I would love to hear Reed say mama or stop taking his seizure medicines, but if Reed would just tolerate clothing, if he would just eat something besides donuts and pepperonis, now that would be a significant improvement in his quality of life. The little wins would be the less screaming, the less throwing, biting, tantrums, and more engaged and responsive behaviors. The little wins would inch Reed that much closer to a more manageable life, even if that life does require constant care.
Thank you very much, Whitney. And now we have Christine.
As the parent of 2 children with PKU and as the executive director of the National PKU Alliance, the neurological implications of PKU affect the daily lives of my children and the lives of adults and families across the U.S. So my 2 children with PKU are Connor and Kellen, and in this picture they're standing in front of the tandem mass spectrometer, which is the newborn screening test. So that's the machine that reads those results. So as you know, many see PKU as the success story of newborn screening. We've been screening for PKU for more than 50 years in this country. We've been treating PKU for more than 50 years. However, PKU is not solved. We're not done with it. People thought that you just could put these kids on a special diet, they would be fine. However, we now know that this is not the case. PKU is also different from many other inborn errors in that we are not just a pediatric disorder. We estimate that there are about 5,000 adults with PKU in the United States. Some of them are doing quite well. I know adults that are doctors, dietitians, lawyers, and executives. However, many are not doing so well. They find it difficult to hold down jobs, have anxiety, cannot handle social situations, and suffer from phobias. Certainly, we are very lucky in that PKU is diagnosed and treated from birth, and that treatment can mitigate the most serious consequences of the disease. Our children no longer grow up to be mentally disabled. However, many have deficits in executive function, information processing, and suffer from depression and anxiety. For example, my son Connor was diagnosed with ADHD at the age of 5. Research actually shows that 35% of all children and adults with PKU have ADHD. However, the rate in the general population is about 7 to 8%. Researchers don't know exactly why this happens. We don't know as much about PKU as we thought we did even 10 years ago. We just don't understand what happens when that excess phenylalanine crosses that blood-brain barrier. PKU is still not solved, and many face and struggle with neurologic consequences. It's also difficult for many in our community to control their blood Phe levels within the recommended range of 2 to 6 milligrams per deciliter. For Connor, my PKUer that also has ADHD, his symptoms of ADHD dramatically increase even when his blood Phe levels are slightly elevated. For example, last year, for about 4 months, his blood Phe levels were running in about the 7 to 8 milligrams per deciliter. This is only 1 or 2 deciliters above the recommended range. However, during this time, he could no longer focus at school. He skipped problems on tests. He had difficulty completing simple assignments and could not follow directions that were more than 1 step. He couldn't even fill out his sticker chart at school to reward good behavior. He went from being a bright and inquisitive model student to one that was beginning to fail 2nd grade, and his teachers talked to us about holding him back. Connor's struggles are not alone. Current dietary treatment for PKU is difficult to maintain. Many in our community do not have insurance coverage for medical foods. My son Connor is easily disorganized, forgets the task he's trying to complete, and has difficulty staying on task. My 6-year-old Kellen doesn't display these signs to the extent as Connor, but I do see that his brain takes longer to process information than my other older son who does not have PKU. And here's the challenge, here's the catch with PKU. To control your Phe levels, to be on diet with medical foods, you have to be very organized and meticulous. You have to weigh and calculate the amount of phenylalanine in every single bite of food you take. You have to record all of this in a journal. Then you have to remember to prepare your formula, use a gram scale, remember to take that formula at least 3 times a day, and possibly take other medication. However, as your Phe levels rise, your ability to track your treatment and the executive function skills that you need to stay on treatment decrease. And so you fail. While I feel extremely blessed that my children with PKU have a treatment, that they are not mentally impaired, that they can go to school, they can go to college, they can have a family someday, they do struggle with executive function. I only want what every parent wants for their children. I want them to have the best outcomes possible and the best opportunities available to them. I especially worry about Connor and Kellen and how they will manage their PKU on their own as they grow into young men.
Thank you so much, Christine. Now we have Steve.
Hi, everyone. In addition to being a dad of 3 MPS 1 individuals, I'm also president of the National MPS Society. The mucopolysaccharidosis, or MPS for short, are a family of 12 individual syndromes, each missing a different enzyme, that fall within the broader lysosomal storage disorders. They're all progressive, degenerative, and terminal. The vast majority of the syndromes are characterized by drastic neurologic manifestations, including profound cognitive regression and mental retardation. Children with MPS are not typically identified at birth, but start to be identified once they start missing developmental milestones. Children begin developing normally, gaining skills such as speech and possibly toilet training. However, such skills are eventually lost over time in most of the children and are replaced with extreme restless, overactive, and difficult behavior, including not sleeping for days and seizures. As the disease ravages the brain, most children start slowing down, lose the ability to walk or communicate, and eventually pass away as their body's essential systems shut down. Within the 12 syndromes, there can be extreme variability in the neurologic symptoms, with the majority of kids having a severe clinical presentation, as I previously described, while others present with attenuated symptoms, like my children. My 3 children have an attenuated form of MPS 1 called Hurler-Scheie syndrome. They were diagnosed 20 years ago. Spencer passed away 6 years ago at the age of 18 due to a medical accident. Maddie is currently 24 years old, and Lainey is 22 years old, and they both live at home with us. Growing up, their neurologic symptoms were milder than most MPS children, but included decreased memory and concentration and learning difficulties in school, especially extremely poor math skills. While they were mostly in regular classes in school, they were in special education for math and English, as their IQs dropped over time. As opposed to the extremely impaired, they understand that they have cognitive limitations that makes it difficult for them to consider normal activities such as driving a car, going to college, having close friends, getting a normal job, or ever living alone. My children have benefited physically from well over 10 years of enzyme replacement therapy, allowing them to live longer, healthier lives. However, it has not helped them neurologically. As a result, Maddie is now suffering from extreme psychiatric symptoms that were previously only seen in the most attenuated form of MPS 1, known as Scheie syndrome. I believe this is a problem that will continue as the Hurler-Scheie children begin to live longer lives. She has developed what is being called bipolar disorder in her teenage years. It is likely a result of the GAG accumulation in a particular area of her brain. It presents itself as mania, depression, and psychosis. While it was more or less controlled with medication for approximately 5 years, the psychosis has been back again continuously for the past 9 months. She has been hospitalized with her symptoms, but normal psychiatric meds have been unable to control it. Out of the past 24 months, she has been in a psychosis, or this altered mental state, for all but 7 of those months. She is extremely delusional with auditory and tactile hallucinations that constantly taunt her. The voices make her sob daily, telling her bad things have happened or will happen. Her quality of life has suffered tremendously from her disease, such that she cannot do anything productive, including being happy or content for more than a few hours at a time, or care for herself, and at 22 years of age cannot be left alone. The neurologic impact on the MPS diseases is severe and dramatic. While we currently have approved therapies that help the physical effects of some of our diseases, we have no approved therapies that treat the neurologic symptoms, and we need them, and we need them now.
Thank you very much, Steve. And now we have Melissa, who will be on the phone, and I'm going to put a picture. Oh, operator, can we have Melissa join, please? As I mentioned, Melissa faced a family emergency over the weekend and was not able to attend in person.
Can you hear me?
Hi, Melissa. We can hear you well. Thank you.
Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure.
Can I get
Thank you very much for allowing me to call in, and I really appreciate this opportunity to speak about our Olivia and the neurological effects on our family for Gaucher's disease. She had type 2 or 3. There are 3 types. Type 1 is non-neurological, and there is enzyme replacement therapy that works well for that. Our type 2, 3 children do receive enzyme replacement therapy, but that's only just to help the systemic parts of the disease process. Many of the signs and symptoms of the neurological part, such as swallowing abilities and many neurological things. Olivia experienced laryngospasm, myoclonic jerks, seizures, and spasms, increased tone, which is that spasticity that Teresa touched on earlier, central apnea. These have been the most significant impacts on Olivia's life. Most or nearly all of the babies diagnosed with Gaucher's 2 or 3 have suffered from these blue episodes, what we call them, or the laryngospasm. The child's larynx will clamp shut, not allowing air to come in or out. As the disease progresses, so will the frequency of these spasms, and many children either succumb to the symptoms, so you will not see them live past 2, or they undergo a tracheotomy. We would have lost Olivia had we not trached her at age 1. The myoclonic jerks or seizures and spasms increase with the disease progression as well, and were best controlled by a combination of medication. Due to the metabolic nature of the disease, however, those medications will need to be frequently increased and changed often to catch up to the neurological symptoms. Many of these spasms would cause breath-holding spells, so even on a ventilator, as Olivia's disease progressed, she would still turn blue. We always had an ambu bag ready nearby. Increased tone was also difficult as it created pain, and she was never able to sit up or crawl or roll over. So even with physical therapy, the tone was difficult to break. As the disease progressed, my daughter was unable to do most activities that any normal infant or toddler could do. She was unable to walk, sit, talk, sit up, crawl, play with toys unassisted, etc. She gained a few milestones. In her first 5 months, she was only able to scoot in a walker, which happened to be backwards because her tone put her that way. She was only able to do that until about 16 months, but it became difficult for her to hold her head up due to the multitude of anti-seizure and anti-tone and anti-anxiety medication she was on. By 18 months, she was pretty much laying down all the time. She did have the ability to transfer a toy from one hand to the other, but eventually lost that ability. She was able to reach for toys for a while as well, but in the end, you can only see just a small effort being made on her part, but she couldn't quite get there. We would sit her up, play games, take her outside, as you can see in the picture. We would read books to her, play with toys, hand over hand. She did smile and laugh at silly things. She watched her favorite show. She said a couple of words, only one syllable though. As you can see, she just passed away at age of 3. Over time, as the disease progressed, so did her neurological signs. When she was born, she only had very small movement of her eyes. And eventually, she lost her ability to gaze side to side or up or down. I think she was able to gaze downward, but that was about it. Any other effort to see required movement of her head would eventually, she was really difficult for her to do that. Her eyes also developed apraxia and strabismus, and her spasms decreased over time. Chorea movements came and went, depending on how much medication she was on. Myoclonic jerks increased and seizures developed, and these are very difficult to treat. Towards the end, she would sleep most of the time. Comfort care and palliative care became her number 1 as we became closer and closer to the day she left us. Towards the end, she lost the ability to urinate on her own, whether or not that was neurological or just her body shutting down, but it was a difficult time. Other neurological symptoms that many of the children face, including Olivia, are the central apnea. So she started breath holding in her sleep, and then eventually it would progress farther. So she started with her ventilator only during naps and sleep time, and then eventually became 24/7. She also did require G-tube to eat as well. So, as you can see, all of these neurological progressions were extremely difficult and extremely taxing, and eventually took her life at the age of 3. We were very lucky to have her until 3. Many of the Gaucher's 2 children do not live past 2. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Melissa, can she stay on the line? Yeah, Melissa will stay on the line if we at some point have any follow-up questions for her.
Okay,
Thank you, Melissa. And finally, we have Tracy.
Good morning. My name is Tracy Van Houten. I'm founder of the Noah's Hope Batten Disease Research Fund and board member of the Batten Disease Support and Research Association, the largest organization in the world dedicated to support of family and scientific research into a group of diseases commonly known as Batten disease. I'd like to thank the organizers at the FDA for their thoughtfulness in putting together these meetings and including these groups in the Inborn Errors of Metabolism meeting. 2 of my 3 children have a neurodegenerative lysosomal storage disorder called late infantile neuronal ceroid lipofuscinosis, more commonly known as late infantile Batten disease. Over time, due to severe brain atrophy caused by waste buildup in the brain, affected children suffer mental impairment, worsening seizures, progressive loss of sight and motor skills, and eventually children with Batten disease become blind, bedridden, tube-fed, unable to communicate. Presently, it is always fatal, usually between the ages of 8 and 12. My daughter Lane is currently 8, and my son Noah is 10. To pick just a few of the symptoms is difficult because my children have experienced losing everything, and I truly mean everything. They started life as happy, normal kids. They ran and played, talked just like normal kids, read books, had many friends and playmates, and hit all of their milestones appropriately. But all that began to change at about age 3.5, when the seizures and some other symptoms began. I'm going to speak on a few of these symptoms, first being seizures. This is the symptom that has been with us the longest amount of time. Because of the progressive nature of Batten disease, we continue to adjust the anti-seizure meds. We never decrease meds and often add new medications on top of old, as my children reach the safety limits of their old ones. As many of you know, these anti-seizure meds have serious sedating and other side effects. Sometimes we're not sure if the children have lost abilities due to the disease or because of the many side effects of these drugs. And as many parents in the room here know, your child having a seizure exhausts their small bodies, adds damage to their brains, and leaves us as parents feeling helpless and terrified. Another symptom is loss of sight. People who have seizures often report not remembering the seizure episode, but when you're talking about the symptom of losing your sight, it's an entirely different matter. Noah and Lane were and are scared of the darkness that surrounds them. Noah had lost his ability to speak when his world went dark, but Lane was still verbal as her sight gradually disappeared, and she was terrified and would often cry to us, asking us if she would become like Noah. So the third symptom I'm going to speak about encompasses a few different things, being loss of all motor function. It's a broad category and affects every part of our lives and the lives of our children. Ataxia was one of the early symptoms and led us as parents to restrict the last remaining freedoms our children had. Physical and occupational therapy, padded helmets, and adding padding to other items in the home only did so much. Our children's frustration was apparent as they continued to lose motor function. Eventually, both Noah and Lane became totally immobile and wheelchair-bound. This has affected us greatly as parents. We had to sell our home to find one that was more accessible for the children and their growing list of equipment. The toll of continued lifting and carrying of Noah and Lane, including bathing, has taken its toll on our bodies and my wife and I, and we are now regulars at our local chiropractor and physical therapy clinics. In addition to this, they lost the ability to speak. This too has been devastating to the children and us as parents. As our children lost the ability to tell us their wants and needs, we could sense their constant frustration. I suppose the best way to describe these waning months of their speech, it was sort of like they would have a stuttered sentence that they were never able to complete. We would see Noah and Lane try so very hard to tell us something, but they were never able to fully communicate with us. The countless hours of speech therapy perhaps only extended their abilities a few months. I would also say that emotionally this took one of the largest toll on us as parents. Not being able to hear your child's precious voice is truly devastating and something we miss terribly. They have also lost control of their bowels and bladders, which necessitates our children still being diapered. Their inability to clear oral secretion requires round-the-clock suctioning to prevent our children from drowning on their own saliva and secretions. Noah and Lane have also lost the ability to eat. Making the decision to take oral foods from your child that they once loved because the choking hazard is simply too high is something no parent should have to do. We would spend hours carefully feeding the children, but eventually had to have a G-tube placed for safety and because Noah and Lane were losing too much weight. As far as activities that are important to our children, I think this was pretty much covered in some of my first answer. Children affected by Batten disease lose everything. But here's a list of some of the things that Noah and Lane used to like to do but cannot do any longer. Noah loved to play baseball and soccer, but he can no longer see the ball, run or kick the soccer ball, or even hold a bat. Noah used to have a fascination with trains. He loved to watch movies about trains. His favorite park had trains pass by every 20 minutes, and he loved playing with toy trains. All of this is now lost. Noah loved to play with his fraternal sisters, Lane and Emily. I guess the only saving grace here is that Noah never had to experience his siblings losing all of their abilities. Lane had to experience this with Noah, and Emily, Lane's unaffected twin, has had to watch both her brother and sister drift further and further away. Lane loved to dance on the ballet floor with her sister and classmates. We allowed her to continue doing this as long as we could, but eventually it became too great of a danger for her to continue. Lane was also a natural swimmer, loved the pool, the beach, any water she could find, including the kitchen sink. We actually delayed having Lane's G-tube put in against our doctor's orders because we wanted her to enjoy the last few months of summer swimming at the pool, as we knew it would be her last summer of swimming independently. When talking about how the symptoms have changed over time, all of our children's symptoms have changed so incrementally, you would not really notice from day to day as abilities were lost. It's only really when looking from month to month or quarter to quarter that the losses become real and very, very noticeable. In the beginning, it was a few mispronounced words or mixed up sentence structure. Now, in the end, it's silence. In the beginning, there was some mild squinting while looking at books or watching a movie. Now darkness. And in the beginning, a few clumsy stumbles, some scraped knees, and a few stitches. And now stillness. In the beginning, there was some mild coughing while eating. Now just the constant hum of the suction machine and the squeaky motor of the feeding pump. In the end, all abilities once mastered were lost and never regained. No matter how much we fought, doing everything we could, Noah and Lane are losing a tragically unwinnable battle against Batten disease. I'm going to close now, but I'd like to mention something. Decisions made by personnel at this agency matter. You do have a tough job, and we realize that. But I believe my daughter Lane should have had the chance to potentially participate in a clinical trial testing enzyme replacement therapy for Batten disease. People in this agency decided to delay approval for the trial for some reason. The same data package was taken to multiple sites in Europe, and children in Europe are now on therapy in the trial. Because of this delay here in the U.S., Lane has progressed and would no longer be eligible if and when this trial starts here at home. We need to do better for these kids here in the United States. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tracy. And I'm going to, in the interest of time, we want to get to the facilitated discussion. We're a little bit over. We can make up time for that. We will have some follow-up questions for you as we go, as we talk about the specific symptoms that are mentioned. But I would like to give a round of applause to all of the parents who we hope have spoken on behalf of the rest of you in the audience. With that, I'd like to say how many people sitting out here saw something, recognized something of your own experience or perspective or that of your loved one by hearing the range of the comments provided today. Okay. Anyone that said, I didn't hear anything that resonated? Okay, we didn't think so, but again, thank you. We're going to focus as much as we can on particular effects and how they manifest themselves. And we're not going to get to all of them, but there are a few that we wanted to focus on in particular, because as Dr. Braccio mentioned, they are the hardest ones to grasp. And that is going to be the cognitive and behavioral and some of those other related symptoms, but we will focus on a number of other ones. Before we do that, we have a polling question that will help put in context what all of you in the room think are the most important effects that affect you if you have the disease or your loved one. This type is tiny. We wanted to squeeze as much as we could into a polling question. But we want to know if you can use your clickers, and if you're on the web, go through the webcast. Which of the following symptoms currently have a significant impact on your or your loved one's life if you're as the patient? Please choose all that apply. So those motor deficits that we heard Tracy talk about and some of the others, such as weakness, spasticity, walking problems. The balance or coordination problems, B. Seizures, C. The sensory impairment, such as the vision loss that we heard about, or hearing loss. Impaired cognition or developmental delay. Behavioral problems that we heard about earlier, the hyperactivity, the aggressive behavior, the hypersensitivity. Bowel or bladder problems. Pain such as headaches, nerve pain, or abdominal pain, or something else if not mentioned. We heard many other things even mentioned by the panelists that aren't on this list. I think that's the number. So how do we begin? So we'll try to work through as much as we can through these symptoms, but you have reiterated that you have this whole range of symptoms that are significant, with the most prevalent in the group here being the impaired cognition or developmental delay. Can I ask on the web what the results are?
On the web, we have about a majority of folks who've said motor deficits, along with impaired cognition or developmental delay, behavioral problems, and bowel and bladder problems.
Okay.
And there was a good over 50% have said others as well.
Okay. We'll delve into this other category. And the FDA panelists, if you can jot down if any of these are surprising to you and you want to follow up on them in a little bit, please do so. So let's start with the cognitive effects again and revisit some of the things. We heard Whitney talk about them. We heard Christine talk about them. And actually, I think all the panelists talked about them, manifesting themselves from severe cognitive effects to more mild ones. And if it's hard to lump the cognitive and the behavioral, that's okay. Would anyone in the audience like to share your experience if you had cognitive up here that might differ from what you heard before? We have some microphones running around, and there is the standing one, but we can bring a mic to you. Anyone want to share? Anyone want to share, even if it sounds like what was on the panel and you want to reiterate it? Okay. We'll bring the mic to you. If you could just state your name and what the underlying disorder is.
Sure. Sanfilippo, so MPS 3A. And I think it's the nonverbal. Just not being able to communicate is tough because you don't know how to help them on a daily basis. So.
The nonverbal. So you notice we didn't have nonverbal in here, and as I was reading through, I thought, well, where would we have put that? How many of you had nonverbal symptoms in as other? Okay, so if nonverbal is significant to you, could you raise your hand just so we can get a sense? Okay, let's focus on this one a little bit more. Does anyone else want to follow up on the nonverbal effects?
My son Reed is 6. He has Sanfilippo syndrome, and he was asymptomatic till about 3 years old, and we put him into a natural history study, and about halfway through that, we watched him lose all his speech, so going from nearly a normal child to not being able to speak in about 6 months. And it was a really painful process because I watched him cry every day because there was something inside of him that he wanted to get out, and it just couldn't happen. And it's a very helpless feeling as a parent to want to help your boy or your girl and see them lose everything. And what I felt was a lot of his behavioral issues were due to frustration around losing skills, and so maybe they were connected in a way because he knew he used to be able to do something they couldn't anymore, and that was really hard for him.
Okay, thank you. We heard about the progression of the language challenges as progressing slowly. Can I just ask, does anyone have an experience where it happened more rapidly? In the back there?
Hi, I'm Jana Monaco, and I have 2 children with isovaleric acidemia. And my son Steven is 16, and he was a late diagnosis at 3.5, so he was the perfectly healthy, normal child who just didn't wake up one day. And he suffered severe disabilities, it was a severe brain injury. And so everything that happened with him was abrupt over a 24-hour period of time. And he's affected in all of those categories except for behavior. He's pretty calm and happy. But I think nonverbal is an issue because, again, he was very verbal. And when a child like that loses that ability, among other things, he has a vision impairment as well with limited vision. Over time, you work very hard to try to recover what you can. It's been 13 years since his crisis. And I've always described him as a child who his receptive language and abilities is far better than his expressive. But society doesn't quite always have that patience or tolerance, and we are always 2 steps ahead of everyone. And so we have learned to understand a lot of his abilities and his attempts to try to communicate vocally over time, but most often it's dismissed. And when you try to look for therapies and augmentative devices that try to fit that particular child, because he doesn't have the ability to use his hands, many things are not available for him. And then you basically get shoulders shrugged from the therapists or the educational people who just say they don't have anything else to offer. So we've had to be creative in our own ways and try to explore therapies that are not approved by FDA or the medical profession to try to tap into those abilities, which are costly. But we've also pulled him out of the school system because we didn't feel that they were supporting him in the way that he needed that was most effective for him. So that is frustrating because, I think families know things that professionals don't understand, but they're quickly to try to dismiss it.
I see a lot of heads nodding in the room and resonating with that. Can I ask the FDA panel, do you have any specific follow-up questions on the nonverbal or the language challenges? What about the other cognitive effects? We heard about impaired executive functioning, the decision making. Does anyone want to follow up on that and how you get a sense of that? So, Georgie, we have one right up here, and then we'll go in the back.
Hi, I'm Mary, and I'm actually going to speak in regards to my sister who also has PKU. I have PKU as well. She was late diagnosed because she was born before newborn screening at 18 months of age, and she did receive treatment on and off, but then she went off diet for a long period of time and had really elevated Phe levels. And when we got her back on diet, well, during that time period, for an example, I would take her shopping. And we had to get bananas. They were on her grocery list. And I kid you not, 5 minutes, I timed it. It was 5 minutes to pick which bananas she wanted to take home. And I even impatiently said, well, why don't you I'll just pick them. She's like, no, I want to pick my bananas. Just give me a minute. But it was 5 minutes for her to pick bananas. And then several years later, after we got her levels under control and got her doing better again, we went shopping for shoes. And I said to my mom as I went out the door, I'm like, I might be gone for a couple hours. I'll see you in a couple hours. But actually, I was back in 15 minutes. We went to Payless Shoes, and there's a lot of choices there. So I was a little worried about that, first of all, because I'm like, she can't, how are we going to decide? She picked her shoes within 10 minutes, and I said, okay, let's look at all the other shoes. And she's like, nope, I like these. She tried them on. She's like, nope, these are the ones. And I'm like, are you sure? Look at these other options. Oh, I've looked. I'm sure. These are the ones I want. And she can make decisions now, and she's so excited and so happy, and so am I, because I don't mind taking her shopping anymore. But it seems like a little thing, but it is an amazing thing. It's an amazing thing to see that ability come to someone. You don't think about that taking brain snaps power to, make a decision about bananas or shoes, but it does. Mm-hmm. And she can tell the difference. And that's what's exciting, is how happy she is about her abilities to do those things.
Thank you very much. Any other sort of cognitive, or let's go on to the behavioral effects that you experience. Regarding the behavioral effects, let me ask a follow-up question so we can tease this out. How many of you agree with, I forget who just said it, about the behavioral effects? When you see them, you believe they may be associated with the frustrations with other challenges that your child or you face. Okay. Does anyone want to talk? So I think we can understand that. What about other behavioral effects that are not so much out of frustration, but are somehow different? Okay, in the back there.
Yes, my name is Eduardo Balcells, and I have a daughter, 10. Her name's Ava. She has Leigh disease, which is a mitochondrial disorder, and the mitochondria are responsible for providing energy to our body. And so Ava has significant developmental delay, in addition to her behavioral issues that I wanted to comment on extend from the fact that because of her limited ability to understand the situation, the environment, she has moments of anxiety. Mm-hmm. So anxiety is something that we deal with Ava. We have learned to have routines with Ava, habits, and that this has allowed us to give her a sense of safety and a sense of trust in her environment and us. In addition, she has significant motor, loss of motor function and loss of motor tone. So she's non-ambulatory. And so for us, the neuromuscular manifestation of her disease is something that we deal with quite a bit on a day-to-day basis. And she's come a long way, but again, a lot of that's been from supportive care, therapies. In addition, like I mentioned, the habits that she's formed to allow her to sort of live in an environment and understand what's next, and sort of not get in a situation where a dangerous situation where safety is an issue. But I think for her, the lack of being able to understand and the lack of her being able to also communicate gives her a sense of anxiety, and that's that can be very difficult. So I think the psychiatric neuropsych component is something that falls into the others in her situation.
So you're all reiterating the interconnectedness, I'll say, of all of these symptoms. Actually, Whitney, I have a follow-up question for you, because we're hearing about anxiety, but you spoke about having no fear. And I was just wondering if your son, if Reed, ever does experience fear or anxiety in contrast to the times that he feels nothing. No fear.
Right. No, he definitely has periods of anxiety, especially, if he were here today in a room full of a lot of people, his pants would be down and he would be running for the exit. I think, and that's one of the reasons why we're unable to kind of take him to these social gatherings, whether it be the grocery store or restaurant, loud noises and, a lot of commotion, things going on around him, sort of cause him to be very uncomfortable. And that progresses into some of the behavioral issues that we deal with.
So can I get a show of hands to get these two contrasts? How many of you have your child or you where the behavior falls on that aggressive? I'm going to use inappropriate, but I don't mean it in any bad way, just as a sense of the word. The behavior that falls on the spectrum that Whitney's talking about when you thought of behavioral problems, behavioral challenges. Oh, more like the types of behaviors that Whitney's talking about, more that would be seen to be inappropriate in public. Okay, so a couple. Oh, maybe 5 or 6. Okay, how many, when you thought of the behavioral problems, thought more of aggression? Or maybe they're all related. They're all related. What about the anxiety? Not so much you listed that as a behavioral problem, but that's how it manifests itself. Okay. All right. Yes, Dr. Brad.
I was interested in Steve's comment about the psychosis symptoms of delusions and hallucinations, and I wanted to know if there was anyone else in the audience who had experience with those sorts of symptoms.
A couple here. Would you like to comment on it? Oh, here, let me.
My grandson Greg has MLD, and he hears voices. And his first symptom that led to diagnosis was a psychotic breakdown in school, where he heard voices telling him to hurt himself and other people.
That address your question?
There's between Tay-Sachs and MPS, they do have the same storage, heparin sulfate and dermatan sulfate, so that's one reason I think it's coming from the gags.
Hi, my name is Holland, and my son has PKU. And I just want to make a comment on some of the behavioral impacts that I've seen as well. And to reiterate some of Christine's comments on the difficulty of maintaining the diet. And, I'm thankful for some of the aspects of PKU in that it is diagnosed at birth. And we do have a treatment for it. And my son will grow up, attend college and go to school. And I am thankful every day for that. However, it is not cured. And we do look for treatments, enzyme replacement and, pharmaceuticals, liver cell transplantations. We're looking for these innovative treatments and hopeful that there's a bright future for those. And in terms of what's available today, it's a daily formula intake that we rely on as 80% of his diet in association with fruits, vegetables, medical foods, and, a very severely restricted low-protein diet. It involves weighing the foods, as Christine mentioned, very meticulous recording of the intake. And then as levels get escalated, even when they're slightly out of range, you do see some of these behavioral impacts. Some of those are, aggression, distractibility. I've seen Drake get very frustrated easily. One thing that's not up there is sleep disruption. And I've seen some studies recently showing the impacts of sleep on learning, and so I wonder, what could be explored there. He sleepwalks sometimes when his levels are elevated, and has bad dreams and night tremors and that kind of thing. And also, he's had some difficulties in school with behavior when his levels have been elevated.
Thank
So
you very
just
much.
Wanted to share that.
Yes. We'll follow up with more on the treatments and the management of all of these things in topic 2, and we'll draw upon that as well. Peter has a question.
Hi, Peter Como from FDA. Many of you and folks in the audience seem to suggest a variant of a behavioral problem that is best described as obsessive or compulsive behavior, either ruminative thoughts or compulsive rituals. Is that something that you're seeing a lot in your children? And if anyone could elaborate on what those signs or symptoms are, that would be helpful.
So can we get a show of hands first for how many experience that? Okay, so we'll go with you, and then we'll go with you right there.
Hi, Dean Sir. My daughter, Lindy, who you'll meet in a little bit, she's 33 now, has juvenile MLD. She actually was diagnosed because of those compulsive behaviors. It was the slow loss of cognitive skills that everybody tolerated and deferred and said, well, that's just behavioral and this and that and so on, and lack of impulse control and so on. But when she finally, if I could say that as almost with a sigh of relief, when she had those pikas and those really impulsive behaviors, we as a society recognize that as, oh, something's wrong. So yeah, it is something that we have to deal with, but at least it's something we can grab onto too.
Thank you very much, Dean. And then right here, I'll bring the mic around.
Hi, I'm Jill. I'm the founder of Jonas Just Begun Foundation to Cure Sanfilippo Incorporated. And I wanted to give you something a little more lighthearted on the behavioral, since this is pretty heavy-duty stuff. Sanfilippo syndrome is an MPS. It's MPS 3, and it covers almost all of these things. But my son's compulsion is licking. He likes to lick people. And it can be funny at sometimes, but absolutely exasperating. We had a flight a few weeks ago, and I put him in the middle, so he's trapped in the middle, and he can't run down the hallway and play with the window and that sort of thing. And this gentleman sitting next to me, I had the hell. It was so awful getting my son onto the airplane. I thought we were going to get kicked off. I was like, I'm never flying alone with him. But Jonah jumped into this guy's lap and started licking his face, licking his hands, and the guy just took it. I was just so exasperated. I was like, I love you. I love you.
Thank you so much. Are there other, we could go on a range of other symptoms. Go ahead. Yeah.
Pica, is that how you say it? I guess my son has Sanfilippo, and he's constantly chewing things, and it makes him sick all the time because he just puts everything in his mouth. And one of the things that I think is confusing to a lot of people about Sanfilippo syndrome is they see what they perceive as aggression is just impulsivity on his part. It's not actually aggression. So if he has a cup and you stand in front of him, you're likely to get the cup chucked in your face, right? And it's not because he's trying to hurt you. It's just because that's what he does with a cup that's in his hand. It's just going to get launched. And he loves his iPad. He loves to watch it. And he'll look up at me. He's happy to see me, and he throws it right in my face. And so, I guess this isn't something that. Some of the things I worry about, though, these are how do you measure these kinds of things for a treatment? And I guess that's what you guys think about as experts. But these are really small populations, and treatment effects may be very small. But I would be interested in these things that are subtle and maybe even objective. How do you measure these, right?
I think that's why we're here today, is to hear these things that we don't usually hear about in more technical settings. Let's see, one here, and then we'll go to...
And I just want to go, you mentioned sleep, and sleep is critical. Our son, again, who has Sanfilippo, will go for weeks without sleeping, and you just can't function. So you take a look at, aggression and everything else. When you're in that situation, not to mention the whole rest of the family who is awake, it's something that really needs to be looked at. So.
Can I get a show of hands who put sleep in their other category? Okay, so this is Sanfilippo. Okay, Christine?
I just wanted to add that, some people have asked, how the FDA would measure these things. And I have to say, as a parent, I don't even know how to measure them. When my child decides to break out in song in math class, or, I have to tell him 8 times to brush his teeth in the morning, or something is happening, I always wonder, is that just because he's having a bad day? Is it because he has PKU? Is it because he's a boy? Is it because he's 6 years old and this is what happens? And it's very difficult as a parent to try to figure out how to discipline when you're not quite sure of the causes of them, and that's a constant struggle, I think, for my husband and I, is to figure out what is the underlying cause of this.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of gray.
Thank you so much.
Well, and I think sometimes, if I can just add, there may be multiple causes for an action. Let's say Reed, like your son may have a cup he's drinking from and he's going to chunk it at you. Sometimes it's because it's empty. He needs some more drink. And then there's other times where he does it because that's just what he does. When he's done with a cup, he doesn't know how to put it down, so he's just going to drop it. So, yeah, how do you kind of determine, is it a behavioral thing? Is it a habitual thing? Is it a communication issue? There could be all of the above for one action. So
I think this interconnected nature, if you're going to follow up on the docket, if you have thoughts about how you attribute an action that you see, a behavior or an effect, how you tie them together, or what else you think about when you're trying to figure out why is my child behaving in this way, if I can make sense of it. I have not gone to the web yet, so I do want to see if there's any comments that have come in so far on any of the effects that we've talked about. We'll still address others.
So on the web, we have several participants, and they've mentioned nonverbal as a symptom, and also mentioned it actually severely affects the ability to learn and socialize. And it also makes it difficult to know if the patient is going through pain or any other symptoms. On the behavioral side of things, behavioral symptoms and issues do affect the patients, and due to impaired cognition, so they don't understand the danger of running into the road, or also become very anxious before going to a doctor's. One participant also mentioned the struggles with executive functions, behavioral problems, causing inappropriate socialization. And then few mentioned sleep issues as well on the web.
So they're reiterating what they're hearing today. Ron?
So sometimes when we're thinking about measuring behavior, it's not actually so clear if there's an unwanted behavior that goes away, are there desirable abilities that go away? And we've heard a little bit about that with some of the medications, I think. But I guess just when people have been talking about how they think their child might be doing, if they could just share more about the different ways that they might separate out a good day from a bad day, from problems and then good parts of the day.
So I think we have one comment on there, and then I think we'll ask the rest of folks to really expand upon that in your docket comments. But we do have one comment back there.
Thank you. My name is Christy Balcells, and I have a little girl, Ava, who has mitochondrial disease. I'm also the executive director of a national organization, MitoAction. And in representing my daughter, as well as other patients, including adults who have mitochondrial disease, who have behavioral problems and impaired cognition or developmental delay, I think that there's a stigma in those symptoms, such as depression, that it's situational. And I think that adult patients in particular often complain to us that their depression or their issues with executive functioning are blown off as being situational because they have pain or they have other physical issues which greatly impair their quality of life, and so that's not really taken seriously as a symptom category. And I think that it's a real struggle then to definitively define those behavioral problems and issues that are psychological, such as depression, as true symptoms. Similarly, I hear from parents quite often who say that their children who have features that are on the autism spectrum, but their child has a mitochondrial disorder, that the treatment or the focus in terms of approaching those behaviors is based on as if the behavior was somehow caused by the child or the family. But in reality, it's caused by the inborn error of metabolism. It's caused by the defect in the pathway, right? And if we could approach that, maybe we could improve the behavior. But I think that I appreciate the opportunity for a regulatory agency like the FDA to consider that sometimes those slippery slope symptoms really could have the greatest impact for the patient or the family.
Thank you. I want to make sure that we hear about if there's any other symptoms that have not been discussed today that you weren't able, that were in the other category, that are really important to your child or you if you are the patient, and as having an impact, an effect on your day-to-day living. Anything that's not been mentioned? Yeah, Roy?
I've noticed about my son is that it's hard to figure out whether he's upset because he's in pain. And just the other day, I noticed that sometimes within the span of 30 minutes, he'll go through a cycle of crying, and you're trying to figure out if there's something wrong. And sometimes, and then he'll just, 2 minutes later, he'll be happy. And so that seems to me that it's not not pain or something like that. It's he can't describe it to me, but there's this range of emotions that doesn't even seem to make sense to somebody, to us, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that would seem related to.
I see some heads nodding in agreement about the range of emotions as an effect. Are there any? Yes, Teresa?
So, Sarah, I think are you going to get around or back to Ron's question, which is, what does a good day look like? I mean, more about, kind of the flip side of things not going well, but if there are things you see or you'd associate with a good day for your child or for you if you have the disease,
Sure.
that would be helpful too.
And before we go to that, I'm just going to tee up on the phone. If you are on the web, we will have time for a call or two. And we're primarily interested, I think, in hearing about a symptom that has not been, or an effect that's not been raised today. Let me get a show of hands to follow up on Teresa and Ron's question about how many have distinct good days versus bad days. Okay. So someone want to tell us the difference between a good and bad day? Yes, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Rhonda Connolly, and I have 2 sons with PKU also. And although we don't have bad days as in some of these disorders, the one thing, though, is that we have a treatment, and because there are not such physical attributes that my kids don't have some of the side effects, that when they take their diet, they feel great. They concentrate well. They aren't anxious. They aren't moody. And so, but the problem is as they get older, as my son who's now 21, you feel good all the time and you think, well, I don't need to take that today. Or I'm too busy. I'm going to be at my friend's house. I'm not going to take that. Well, guess what? The next day, he is anxious. He is moody. He can't do as well on his math. And he does have issues. So part of it is that you may not have those symptoms to continue and take your diet and pills.
Thank you. Is there any example that's outside of a treatment, a response to treatment, that's just natural variability? Yes. Did you have a hand up? Oh, did someone? Okay, first we'll go to you and then we'll go to Whitney.
Hi, I'm Gordon Wingate. My daughter Jennifer was born with MPS IIIA, and she passed away with MPS IIIA about 5 years ago. I think, in my experience, a good day was any time I had communication. I got laughter out of her. She was happy. She just spontaneously burst out laughing, and I knew something I'd done had, put things right. I think so much of the frustration, the behavioral issues come from the loss of language. In my experience, my observation, the language gave structure to the world that went away. When there's no language, there's no rules, there's no reason for us behaving one way or another. I think back to the story of, Helen Keller before she discovered language. And that's the kind of things. Her inappropriate behavior, there's no rules. I'm just going to walk over and go out here. I'm going to walk out in the street. But definitely the good days were just when I had communication, eye contact, sit and stare at me for long periods of time and just interact personally. And that was powerful.
And could it vary it one day she has the communication ability and the next day she doesn't, and then some days later she does? So there was that variability in a week, for example?
Yeah, and a lot of it had to do with just spending the time to draw it out of her. I mean, we had it in her IEP that, communication was going to be how long could she maintain eye contact? Because eye contact was communication, and it was very directly, I could see that. So yeah, there were good days, there were spontaneous when things were just going right, and, she'd just glow, so.
Thank you very much. Would you like to quickly follow up with?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're in a similar situation where being nonverbal definitely creates issues there for Reed. However, if I had to say, a good day, I can deal with the lack of speech with Reed. If he's having a good day, he's patient. He'll take my hand and put it on the doorknob. He'll give me his cup. I can live without speech. It's the mornings that he wakes up, and we like to call him Taz, the Tasmanian devil, because in a 3-minute time frame, he's woke up, he's pulled his diaper and clothes off, he's spilled a drink off the counter, he's pulled a bag of cereal down and it's all over the floor, and he's dancing on my dining table, all within a 3-minute period. And there's 2 other children in the house who also need care. So those days are the bad days, where you just can't keep up. He's always 3 steps ahead of you, and you're just trying your best to sort of manage him the best you can. I would take Reed nonverbal. I would take him as he is if he would just be a little bit more cooperative and a little bit more even keel. That would make a huge impact on our day, and that would be a good day for me. Given everything else he's dealing with, I think that would make the biggest difference.
Tracy?
Just a quick little different perspective from 2 kids in a terminal disease, probably in the latter third of that disease. So a good day for us is no seizures, and I see that was one of the lower reported outcomes here, but I don't want folks to underestimate that, because I think either the medications we give our kids or the damage caused by those seizures often can lead to some of the other symptoms that were mentioned. But in addition to no seizures, getting a smile from our kids is a good day. Our kids being able to regulate their body temperature on their own is a good day. Having bowel and bladder movements is a good day for them. And not having sores when they come home from school or an outing because their myoclonus has caused them to bang into their wheelchairs, that's a good day too. So just a few things from perspective of a child later on in a disease.
And can I ask, Tracy, are all those things that you mentioned still achievable? Do you still notice those with your children? Are those rare events, or are they more common even if they're variable?
As far as seizures, I think Noah's he's older. I think he's past the point where he's having a lot of seizures now. There's so much brain atrophy, so the no seizures is more important for Lane. We still get more smiles from Lane. We don't see that with Noah anymore. The body temperature regulation is more of a problem with Noah than it is with Lane. Bowel and bladder is with both of them, and they both continue to. Noah more so has more myoclonus than Lane, but she's traveling down that path as well. And secretion, saliva management is also something that they're dealing with now.
So we have one more comment here, and then we do need to go to the phone and give folks a chance. We're a bit over our break time, but I think you will appreciate being we might shorten our break just a little bit and get started on topic 2.
Thank you. Gina Williams, vanishing white matter disease with an underlying mitochondrial disorder as my daughter. I just wanted a little different perspective with weakness. We haven't talked a lot about that, but a good day would be that she'd be able to participate with me, help me transfer her. She's in a wheelchair predominantly. She can eat without food getting stuck. That's what we call it, right? The swallowing issues. The bad day would be that either it's heat, totally wipe her out, she has no energy, whether it be that she's sat up too long and she needs to rest, she's leaning in a wheelchair, we have to set up, hold your head up. She cannot participate in a transfer. She can't even help with the lift. I have a standing frame. She's not strong enough to participate in that and just requires extra rest. Food gets stuck, is what we call it, and the saliva secretions and lots of underlying. So just a little bit of the muscle weakness and how that affects.
Can I ask how old she is? She's
31.
31.
Yes.
Okay. Can we go to the phone and see if, operator, are there any callers on the phone?
Sure. If you'd like to ask a question, you may press *1. Please make sure you record your first and last name and make sure your line is unmuted before doing so. Once again, you may press *1 if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment. Give us one moment, please.
Okay. While we wait, any other questions from FDA? Any thoughts that are important about the manifestations that haven't been mentioned? Okay, in the back there.
Again, representing Ava with mitochondrial disease, just tying into the last comment with regard to motor strength and weakness. And Ava had strokes when she was in utero. She had cerebellar strokes. She has significant ataxia. She's non-ambulatory, but she can crawl. She has intent to be able to grasp things, and she uses an iPad, and which has been a blessing. I tell you, I thank Steve Jobs every morning because it's amazing what Ava's able to do. But in her world, using the iPad, if she has a bad day where she's weak and fatigued because of the motor issues, it impacts her neurologic issues, and she has much more dysmetria. And so she's much less able to grasp her spoon, feed herself, gets food all over herself, is unable to enjoy the iPad, which she really enjoys and engages with. So again, the motor issue ties in with the neurologic issues that she has. Ava's blessed in the sense that she has not had progressive metabolic strokes over time, but other children with Leigh's disease do. So I think these episodic events, such as strokes, manifest themselves in different ways, but in Ava, it's manifested in significant ataxia. And again, tying in that motor issue with the neurologic issue is important for Ava. So when she has energy and she feels strong, her tone's better, she's able to do more and overcome her neurologic deficits.
Okay, thank you.
We have Ross on the phone. Ross, you may speak. Operator?
Mr. Benning's line is now open.
Yeah, I would just say that a good day for Colin is simply one where we can get him to sleep at night and where we can be able to keep him safe.
Okay.
Thank you, Ross.
Thank you.
Next caller, please, operator.
We do have a question from Eileen Linzer. Your line is now open.
Hi, I'm Eileen Linzer. My daughter Quinn passed away last August of pneumonitis type A. We're a bit on the outskirts of a lot of these issues. Quinn was not yet 15 months old when she passed away. So, though it's a neurological degenerative disease, pneumonitis, her liver actually gave out before she hit a lot of those issues for better or for worse. I had selected the other, I'm sorry if you just kind of came up on the phone. Her main issue, as far as quality of life was concerned while she was here, was her feeding issue. She was born, and the day she was born, she started what we thought for the first week was extreme spitting up, and became apparent within just a month or so that it was actually more of a neurological issue. Her swallowing issue, we used to have to hold her upright for a full hour after every single solitary treatment. I have 2 other boys who kind of ran circles around him while we did that. He couldn't move. Otherwise, he was much more likely to vomit, and she was very tiny to begin with, so she couldn't afford to lose it. She did get a G-tube, and it did help it, but it never fully went away. So it was an issue that I know had been raised on the initial slide. It was on there, swallowing, and perhaps because of her age, that was why it was such a big issue for us. But it was a very severe issue, and it really tremendously impacted her and our quality of life.
Thank you very much. You got a lot of, you can't see them, but you have a lot of, a few heads nodding in the audience, resonating with what you're saying. Thank you. Do we have any more callers? Okay, so that's it for callers. How about a web summary of any comments on the web?
We have some folks on the web who mentioned, one participant mentioned that in the case of congenital disorders of glycosylation, there are several obsessive behaviors where patients have difficulty accepting any type of change. One participant mentioned that the attenuated form of mucolipidosis 3 shows signs of short-term memory loss. And in mitochondrial disease, someone else mentioned that the autonomic dysfunction can be a major issue. And for someone with MPS 2, type 2, the participant doesn't have congenital cognitive issues, but suffers from severe migraine headaches, which last 5 to 6 days every month, and the pain is crippling.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There's so much we haven't. One more, we'll take one more question. Or comment, sorry.
Hi, I'm Amy Miller, and I'm here with my son Danny and my husband Ray. Danny has Hunter syndrome, and I was hoping to comment on the last question up there. What's unique in our situation is he, as a young child, had the symptoms that many of you talked about, the extreme hyperactivity. He was the Tasmanian devil. We had our lamps screwed to the tables. We had nothing out in the house. We had locks on things. And being a progressive degenerative disease, now we're dealing with, is it Tracy? Your children. He, at this point, he's 17, almost 18 years old, and it's unique in the fact that we dealt with those behavioral issues early on, but now we're dealing with extreme medical issues that a lot of people don't think it could possibly be the same disease as it was when he was a young child. Physicians who care for him now that never cared for him as a young child can't believe that he could once run around, ride a bike, feed himself, because at this point he has no purposeful movements. He has seizures. He has autonomic instability and storming. He has a feeding tube because he was unable to swallow safely. And he has complete care 24/7. So our complete care from a young child was keeping him safe and adapting our house to keep him safe. We had a room that was all of his own that had toys attached to the wall, so he would play with them instead of throw them, to now complete care as far as monitoring him for seizures, respiratory distress, suctioning. So I just wanted to let you know that the neurological symptoms changed dramatically in some of these diseases over time.
Thank you very much. We are going to have, go ahead, Larry, yes.
Yeah, at the recent narcolepsy meeting, one of the unusual things was that a lot of the people that came to the meeting had never met other patients with narcolepsy, which was kind of I thought was an interesting thing. And I was wondering, in this group, we have a very diverse group with a diverse group of diseases, and I was wondering how many of you are in touch with other families with the disease, and do you find that the symptoms are similar, or that there's a great deal of variability between what your children and families are experiencing?
Let's see, so how about right here, and then if someone hasn't, in the back hasn't gone?
Hi, Gina Williams again, Vanishing White Matter. Before I was mitochondrial, and I was in touch with those, and now that I have a new diagnosis, we do, it's not a support group because there aren't that many of us, but it's an online, and we are in touch and we share, and There's 5 genes that are in effect for vanishing white matter, and the symptoms are very varied. My daughter is very fortunate. I'm one of the least affected.
Thank you. Back.
Hi, I'm also the advocacy liaison for the Organic Acidemia Association, and that it combines multiple disorders that are organic acidemias. And many of us have the similar symptoms. Some of the disorders are a little more involving their treatments and symptoms. Other, especially if they were not screened at birth, like my son. So there are many of us that are in the age bracket that he's in and older who have a lot of severe disabilities and all of the different issues related due to lack of screening. However, many of the ones coming through with newborn screening, my daughter was screened early because of my son, do not exhibit all of these kinds of issues. But then we work very hard to protect them, and there is a fine balance. But there are many variables that affect these children and the adults that live with these disorders. So yeah, we actually are very connected through a website, through the listserv, and actually Facebook pages as well. And we have a family conference coming up this summer here in DC.
If I could make a suggestion for the advocates in the group. We've heard a lot, mainly personal stories and experiences, and I think there's an opportunity for the advocates to expand upon what Larry's asking about that variability from what we heard today and across the patient population that you work with. One more right back here.
My son has late infantile Batten's disease, and we are in constant communication with the other families. It's a very big part of learning about the disease and how to manage day-to-day care for our children. And it's remarkable that the story of the progression of the disease is very similar in terms of diagnosis and just the overall progression of the disease. So it's very similar, and it's very important for us to be in contact with the other families.
I'm going to have to put a time out and have us go to a break. There were so many issues we did not cover today. We heard a lot, but we didn't get into depth in some of the issues, the motor and the other symptoms. Please feel free on the web and here to expand upon those. So we're going to take a break now. I'm going to suggest we come back, try to be back at 11:15. We won't get started without having most of you in the room, but if we can shorten it to 10 minutes, then we can get back started at 11:15. Thank you.